It begins in silence, unnoticed by anyone watching. You're 7 years old, locked in eye contact with a parent unraveling before you. Perhaps it's substance dependency. Perhaps it's rage. Perhaps it's merely the empty quietness of someone too shattered to be present. And without explanation, something primal awakens in your young consciousness. Unless I stabilize everything around me, nothing will hold. This is the moment childhood ends. Not in body, but in spirit. They grin wider. They weep rarely. They master reading emotional atmospheres before uttering words. They transform into the household's emotional regulator. They evolve into miniature grown-ups long before their development allows. And society applauds them for it. So grown up for your age. So dependable. So resilient. But nobody pauses to wonder, what was sacrificed? This represents the hidden mourning of those forced into premature adulthood. And today, we're excavating the psychology behind that youngster because these consequences don't evaporate with maturity. They mold you. They trail you into romantic bonds, professional paths, your core self-perception. And unless you comprehend what occurred, you'll spend your grown years recycling the defense mechanisms that once rescued you, but now gradually destroy you. Let's begin with the developmental reality unfolding. When youngsters are compelled to emotionally stabilize adults rather than receiving that stability, psychologists label this parentification. It's when a youngster becomes the nurturer, the mediator, the counselor, the guardian. This isn't merely detrimental. It fundamentally alters neural pathways. Because when a youngster is repeatedly assigned responsibility for emotional management, either personal or interpersonal, it generates what's termed hypervigilance. You're perpetually monitoring for threats. You navigate carefully around volatility. You discover that affection is conditional. You provide stability, and perhaps they'll offer security. You discover that your requirements are liability, and theirs are priority. So you vanish, not corporally but psychologically. And in your absence emerges a variant of yourself that executes flawlessly. You transform into the compliant youngster, the unobtrusive high achiever, the counselor companion, the one who requests nothing. And you inhabit that persona so authentically that even you misplace the awareness its performance. But underneath, something wounds. Something throbs because the young soul you suppressed didn't perish. They're still present internally wailing soundlessly. Why did nobody shield me? As maturity arrives, the manifestations grow more intricate. You might develop extreme self-reliance. You decline assistance, distance loved ones, or never experience genuine security in intimacy. You might experience emotional flatness during joyful occasions because happiness feels foreign, undeserved, even threatening. You might battle against relaxation because accomplishment is the singular method you've validated worthiness. And most devastatingly, you might remain oblivious you're still operating in emergency response. Because when disorder becomes normalized young, your nervous system designates turmoil as standard. Tranquility feels incorrect. Serenity feels questionable. Affection feels like obligation requiring repayment. This is the psychology of a youngster compelled into accelerated maturation. It's not simply melancholy. It's a layered trauma that reconstructs how you interpret reality and, more critically, yourself. Now you may inquire, why would any youngster voluntarily assume that position? Because youngsters will sacrifice anything for connection, even their authentic selves. The selection is never deliberate. It's biological. In the vacuum of protection, The youngster abandons genuineness for acceptance. That's not fragility. That's brilliance. That's survival intelligence. But the catastrophe is this. What rescued you then confines you now. So countless individuals are functioning as capable adults with profoundly abandoned young souls controlling the narrative. We overperform to secure affection. We remain voiceless to prevent rejection. We nurture everyone while secretly desiring someone would simply inquire if we're all right. And that imagination, that someone will recognize you're not as capable as you appear. That perhaps, just perhaps, you'll finally get permission to collapse and be supported. That is the unfulfilled longing, not of your mature self, but of the youngster who never experienced childhood. The initial step toward restoration isn't correction. It's acknowledgement. Because until you authenticate what transpired, you'll persist in self-deceiving with reflections like, "It wasn't particularly severe. Others experienced worse circumstances. I developed adequately." But adequate is performance, too. And internally, you recognize it. So, what becomes of that youngster when they mature? They transform into adults who never experience safety even in peaceful environments. They transform into partners who cannot accept gentleness. They transform into contributors who cannot accept receiving. They transform into the category of individuals who apologize for emotional expression, recoil at praise, and conflate depletion with achievement. This is the price of accelerated maturation. Because if your early years conditioned you to be resilient at the sacrifice of being vulnerable, to be silent rather than truthful, to repair others while disregarding your own damage, then what sort of adulthood do you receive? You receive an existence where you're perpetually holding tension, anticipating someone to authorize your eventual breakdown. But here's reality. Nobody's arriving to retrieve the youngster you concealed. You are the individual who must return and grasp their hand. You are the individual who must articulate what nobody else expressed. You didn't merit that. You were merely a youngster. You're permitted to rest now. This is the commencement of shadow integration. Not repairing, not executing, not circumventing the anguish with artificial optimism, but rotating toward the forsaken fragments of yourself and declaring, "I witness you now. I acknowledge you now, and I'm remaining." That is the restoration journey. And it's agonizing because it requires you to experience the mourning you never had opportunity to experience. It requires you to occupy the fury, the despair, the unaddressed requirements. To grieve for the celebrations where nobody appeared. To lament the purity you forfeited while defending individuals who should have defended you. But that mourning, it's not weakness. It's evidence that you're restoring, because what was once immobilized is finally releasing. Now let's discuss how this emergency pattern manifests in adulthood, subtly, devastatingly, and frequently invisibly. You might transform into a counselor in all your connections, but never permit anyone genuinely to witness you. You might be celebrated for your autonomy, when internally you're petrified of becoming burden. You might exist in partnerships where you over-deliver, constantly repairing, coordinating, over-elaborating, and questioning why you experience bitterness. You might wrestle with limitations because declining still registers as disloyalty. These are not character attributes. They are adaptation mechanisms, acquired, programmed, and the encouraging news, reversible. But exclusively when you cease glorifying your resilience and commence respecting your injuries. One of the most transformative actions you can execute is inquire of your young soul, What did I require back then that I never received? You may receive responses like, I required someone to communicate it wasn't my responsibility. I required someone to inquire about my well-being. I required to engage, relax, and experience joy without apprehension. And gradually, very gradually, you commence providing those elements to yourself. Not to repair your history, but to cease reliving it. This is how you cease pursuing parental figures in your romantic partners. This is how you cease confusing anxiety for instinct. This is how you cease fleeing from the youngster you were and the identity you're developing. Carl Jung once declared, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. But shadow integration demands that we confront it. All of it. The abandoned, the humiliated, the frightened, the enraged. Because restoration isn't about transforming into someone different. It's about recollecting who you were before the world dictated who to become. So, if you're someone who matured too rapidly, understand this. Your maturity was never the difficulty. The difficulty was that you possessed no alternative. But now you do. You can select vulnerability. You can select to relax. You can select to cease regulating everyone else's feelings and commence honoring your own. And no, it won't materialize immediately. There will be occasions you experience like a youngster again. Excellent. That's the intention. Let that youngster return home. Let them weep. Let them engage. Let them finally be witnessed, because you're not damaged. You're becoming complete. And maybe for the initial time, you're finally maturing the appropriate way. Not through force, not through terror, but through authenticity. You never possessed a childhood, but you still possess a future. And this occasion, you get to compose it. If this resonated deeply with you, hit that like button and share your experience below. And subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into psychology and healing.